Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into, well, one of the most relatable yet kind of disturbing experiences of modern life, neighbor noise. For the listener who shared these sources, the problem wasn't just noise, it was this persistent grating sound, specifically a child upstairs, constantly kicking balls, making noise right on their floor, which was this person's ceiling.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty mundane problem on the surface, doesn't it? But the cumulative effect of noise, especially when you add in chronic sleep deprivation, it can be explosive. The initial anger was intense, sure, but it was sort of focused. He was angry because his rest was being ruined.
That's right. But this deep dive today, it isn't just about the noise itself. We're analyzing source material that takes this simple domestic conflict and uses it to really dissect human nature, anger, and these surprisingly twisted psychological mechanisms, and theological ones too, apparently. Stuff that turns simple irritation into, well, uncontrollable, self-justified rage.
Exactly. So our mission here is to look at that cycle of self-justification that seems to go hand in hand with harmful or retaliatory actions. We're exploring why, according to this material, we often feel most righteous, most justified, precisely when we are arguably sinking to our worst behavior. And it all starts with that friend, driven absolutely nuts by the sound.
Yeah, he was totally at his wit's end, sleep deprived, just consumed by this simmering anger. He asked a friend for advice, about this daily misery, just looking for a way to make the noise stop.
Right, and this is where things take a turn. The friend suggested, well, basically a tool of psychological warfare. Told him to go online, search for a device specifically designed for retaliation, a floor shaker. In the sources, it's called by its Chinese name, shinoki.
And this device sounds terrifying. It's essentially this powerful vibration motor you press against your ceiling, which is the floor of the apartment above. The whole point is just to cause maximum disturbance upstairs. The friend's goal, as described, was literally to make dogs and chickens restless upstairs. It's an escalation, like deliberate misery.
And the neighbor, exhausted and furious, he bought it. He actually went and got one. The next time the noise started up, he mounted the device, turned it on. Described the sound as being like an excavator, just this continuous disruptive vibration aimed right at the people above him.
And it worked. I mean, the effect was immediate. For a while, the upstairs apartment just went quiet. The vibrations were apparently so disruptive they sometimes thought there was an actual earthquake. So, problem solved, right? The noise stopped.
Logically, yeah. You'd think the neighbor should have felt relief, maybe even vindication. But here's the huge paradox that really drives the whole argument in the source material we're looking at. After using that retaliatory floor shaker, the user became even more furious, just like uncontrollably angry, more than he was before he used it.
Wait, that makes absolutely no sense on the surface. Why would successfully stopping the noise make you more angry, lead to a deeper, more profound hatred?
It completely wrecked the relationship. The conflict shifted from just a noise complaint into genuine, profound hatred. And this all culminated in that really extreme moment when the neighbor, just so uncontrollably furious, grabbed a kitchen knife and rushed upstairs. The police had to be called to pull him away from their door.
Wow. And the central question he asked afterwards is pretty chilling. Why did using the retaliatory device make me feel more out of control? He said, I felt justified striking back, but instead of feeling satisfied, I was just filled with this genuine hatred, which led him to grab the knife. It escalated everything from irritation to, attempted violence.
And this brings us right to the core psychological thesis the source material presents. They argue it explains, a lot about human violence and self-righteousness. They basically state that the brain works backward. It doesn't wait for extreme emotion to commit a violent act. Instead, it provides the explanation that extreme anger after the action has already been committed.
So the retaliation, using the floor shaker, or grabbing the knife, that happens first. And the overwhelming feeling of anger is generated after the fact, just to make the action seem rational or justifiable.
Exactly. The action is the fire, and the extreme emotion is like the smoke the brain desperately pumps out to convince the individual that fire was necessary, that it was justified. If your brain didn't generate that overwhelming anger, you'd have to confront the reality that you're someone who committed an unwarranted violent act simply out of spite or ego, right?
Okay, but how does the source try to prove the anger wasn't genuine rage leading to the action, but generated afterwards? Is there more evidence than just, observing that the person throwing the first punch in a street fight always looks way more enraged?
Well, they argue that the visible intensity of that post-action rage is a kind of psychological necessity. It bridges the gap between how you see yourself as a basically good person and the action you just took. If I think I'm a decent guy, but I just hit someone, my brain has to immediately convince me they are the absolute worst person alive to justify what I did. The source also points to marital conflict. It says the person who first resorts to hitting or smashing things is usually the one who appears most visibly, uncontrollably enraged. Why? Because they're doing this cognitive maneuver to validate their own transgression.
That's a powerful insight. It implies the intensity of the rage is actually a measure of the guilt, not the original provocation.
Precisely. And this whole mechanism is rooted in playing the victim. To justify a wrongful action, like buying that disruptive machine or reaching for a weapon, your mind has to exaggerate your own suffering. I'm the victim of this awful noise. And at the same time, exaggerate the other person's unreasonableness. That deep, uncontrollable anger has to match how bad your action was to make it seem acceptable to you, the person taking it.
And this leads the neighbor to that really twisted, kind of self-destructive place. He wasn't just looking for quiet anymore. He actually reached a stage where he hoped the child would make noise again. He started craving the conflict so he could use the floor shaker and strike back justifiably.
Yeah.
He needed their noise to validate his own extreme reaction.
Yeah, the desire for justification becomes almost like an addiction. And this is why the counselor mentioned in the source material felt they needed to take a really extreme stance when talking with the neighbor.
Right, this part is genuinely shocking. The friend admitted to the counselor, look, I'm furious when they make noise, and I'm actually even more furious when they're quiet because I just want to retaliate. And the counselor suggested, hypothetically, well, you already grabbed the knife, you rushed upstairs, why don't you just kill their whole family?
Hold on. Recommending he just kill the family seems incredibly reckless. What was the context? How did the source explain that kind of shock therapy?
Okay, yeah, the source is very clear. It was absolutely not a literal suggestion. It was a confrontation designed to expose the true nature of the intent that was already there in the neighbor's heart. By grabbing the knife and rushing upstairs, he'd already proven that murderous hatred was his reality at that moment.
Ah, okay. And what stopped him then? The source argues he stopped, not because of some sudden return of goodness or compassion for the people upstairs, but simply because he feared the consequences, police, jail, his life being ruined. So the purpose of this extreme hypothetical question was to force him to admit that his own violent rage was actually far more destructive, more evil, if you will, than the child's noise. It revealed his own deep-seated capacity for sinfulness.
That level of escalation, going from a noise complaint to grabbing a knife, it just shows how thin that veneer of civility really is when self-justification takes over. And this leads us directly into the source material's theological critique of human judgment.
Yeah, it connects this really personal hatred to what they see as a universal human tendency, seeing oneself as perpetually righteous. They point to ancient critiques of human behavior, like in the book of Isaiah. The people ask God, why aren't you saving us? And God's reply was essentially, your sins have separated you from me.
And the source really emphasizes verse 4 from that passage. No one brings suit justly. They argue this is the foundational principle of human conflict. When people complain or accuse others or launch retaliatory attacks like our angry neighbor, they always assume they are righteous and justified. That very assumption of self-righteousness is the starting point for the anger that leads to violence.
It makes sense. Because if you feel you are completely in the right, then any action you take, no matter how extreme from the floor shaker to the knife, feels proportionate. It feels necessary to fix the injustice you believe you suffered. The source basically suggests we're all kind of pathologically addicted to this self-justification mechanism.
Which forces a complete reevaluation of morality itself, doesn't it? The source uses the New Testament argument in Romans to explain the real purpose of the law or, our internal moral standards. Our sense of right and wrong isn't given so that humans can achieve righteousness or even just measure others accurately.
No, it's given so we realize that fundamentally there is no one righteous, not even one. It's a radical inversion of how people typically use morality. We tend to use morality like a yardstick, right?
Yeah.
To measure and condemn the faults of other people, saying, oh, that person is unrighteous.
And the source uses this really powerful analogy. It says the law isn't that yardstick for measuring the rest of the world. It's actually a thermometer, given specifically to show you that you have a fever. If you find yourself constantly measuring everyone else's moral temperature, you've completely misunderstood the tool's purpose.
And if we accept that, then the futility of our own efforts becomes pretty apparent. If we can't even use our moral standards justly, how can we possibly achieve true goodness on our own? The source just flatly states, there is no one who does good, not even one.
Which leads us to the solution presented in the source material. If righteousness can't be earned through self-performance or self-justification or just being correct in a fight, where does it come from?
Well, the definitive answer presented is that righteousness has to come as a gift. It comes through grace.
Yeah.
And the realization that you can't earn it is actually the prerequisite for receiving it.
Okay, so this completely flips the script on the conflict, right? The Apostle Paul, who started out as a persecutor, declared in 1 Timothy that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. And then he adds, of whom I am the foremost. Quote, the source argues that if you keep seeing others as bad, like the noisy neighbor, and yourself as good, the poor victim, you're still stuck relying on self-righteousness. And that self-righteousness is the very engine driving your anger.
Yeah, the moment you genuinely believe you are the chief of sinners, that your own internal tendency towards self-justification is actually your biggest problem, suddenly the sins of the noisy neighbor seem, well, less important than your own desperate need for forgiveness.
This is illustrated so well in that story of the sinful woman and Simon the Pharisee from the Gospel of Luke. Simon, the moralist, felt superior, criticized Jesus for even associating with this sinful woman.
Right. And Jesus told that parable about two debtors, one forgiven a huge debt, the other a small one. Who loves the creditor more? Obviously, the one forgiven more.
And the source ties this directly back to our neighbor situation. Your love and gratitude towards God, they argue, is proportional to how aware you are of your own great sinfulness. The woman knew she was a massive sinner, received massive forgiveness, and that led to profound love. Simon, who felt entitled and thought his sins were minor, showed minimal love and maximum judgment towards others.
So when you truly realize you are the chief of sinners, that profound gratitude you feel starts to displace the need for self-justification, and therefore it displaces the anger that comes with it.
Okay, so let's connect this back to the bigger picture. Once you stop relying on your own performance, your own rightness, and instead accept righteousness through grace, you stop seeing the noisy neighbor primarily as someone to be judged, punished, or retaliated against.
Exactly. Instead, you start to see them as just another person in need of salvation and healing, just like you are. And that perspective completely removes the self-righteous ground your anger was standing on. It allows you to stop being the potential killer with the knife, and instead begin receiving what the source calls a love of God, Jehovah Rapha the healer.
So we've kind of seen how self-justification acts like this engine, accelerating conflict, taking a person from a minor disturbance all the way to grabbing a kitchen knife. And the source points towards an antidote, found not in being right or proving the neighbor wrong, but in recognizing our own deep unworthiness, which, paradoxically, allows us to receive a forgiveness and love proportional to our overwhelming need for it.
That transformation is really the core takeaway here. And the source leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought to chew on. It asks, why doesn't God immediately judge all the bad guys, including, your annoying neighbor, or even the person who uses the floor shaker in retaliation? The answer the source provides is profound. It suggests that if God instantly enacted justice according to our often harsh moral expectations, well, would any living person be left in this world?
Something to ponder, right? How acknowledging this universal sinfulness, including your own, might change your expectations for immediate divine justice the next time you feel really wronged by someone.